Good afternoon, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And today we're admiring the second half of Chapter 38, The Challenges to the Post-War Order. Or, if you're using the 15th edition or older, Chapter 39, The Stalemated 70s, in Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey's The American Pageant textbook. Abe, take it away.
All right. Ford was the first person to become president by solely a vote of Congress, and he immediately pardoned Nixon for any crimes that Nixon committed as president. Ford also attempted to enhance the détente with the Soviet Union, so Ford signed the Helsinki Accords. An official end to World War II was declared, and more liberal exchanges were promised between the East and West in the Helsinki Accords. American critics claimed that the détente was one-sided. Essentially, the Soviets weren't doing their part, and Moscow continued to violate civil rights. Now, Frank, could you tell me about the last end of the Vietnam War?
Of course. In early 1975, Communist North Vietnam launched a full-scale offensive into South Vietnam. With American troops out of the picture, South Vietnam quickly capitulated. The war proved a pathetic defeat for America. It had cost the lives of 56,000 men, $118 billion, and the respect of the international community. At no point had there been a clear plan or objective, or a path to victory. Abe, I need girl advice. Tell me about women.
Yes, the exotic female gender. Even though the anti-war movement had largely dissolved, American feminists showed vitality and excitement when U.S. troops began to return from Vietnam. The feminists also won several victories, of which two were very important. The Equal Rights Amendment was approved by Congress. However, it did not ever come into effect because not enough states ratified it. Second, the decision Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion by arguing that, by the constitutional right of privacy, women could decide for themselves to terminate a pregnancy. In response to all these feminist developments, anti-feminists emerged, led by Phyllis Schlafly. Schlafly primarily argued that the ERA would eliminate women's traditional protections, and the ERA would also be detrimental to the American family structure. Now, Frank, could you tell me about migrations during the 70s?
Absolutely. As the 70s wore on, more and more affluent whites began to leave the inner city, migrating out to the suburbs. Unfortunately, suburban schools were often less desegregated than city schools, which created a discrepancy in educational quality between inner city and suburban. Affirmative action policies attempted to fix this, but these were and still are controversial. Affirmative action means that a student should be admitted to a college or get a job based off ethnic or racial factors rather than ability or achievement. Though these policies are successful in creating more school slots for minorities, it undermines the American system of meritocracy. All right, Abe, I've always wanted to drive a Ford Mustang, but can you tell me about Gerald Ford?
I would love to. When the election of 1976 rolled around, Republican Gerald Ford, disappointing since it's not Henry Ford, faced off against Democrat Jimmy Carter. Carter stated, "I'll never lie to you," and he soon after won the election. 97% of African Americans had voted for Carter. Carter quickly established the Department of Energy and pardoned around 10,000 draft evaders from the Vietnam era. Now, Frank, could you tell me about Carter's foreign policy?
Absolutely. America saw several foreign policy victories under President Carter, most famously the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt. These agreements put to rest decades of hostility between the two nations, reliant upon the fact that neither of them violated each other's sovereignty or territory. Carter then allowed for full diplomatic relations with China and handed the Panama Canal back to Panama, ensuring good negotiations and good commitments in South America as well. Abe, we've been talking a lot about domestic policy and international policy, but could you tell me about the economy?
Gladly. As soon as Carter became president, the inflation rate increased dramatically to 13% by 1980. The elderly and people living on fixed incomes suffered severely from this inflation, and bank money lending interest rates surged to a ridiculous 20% by 1980. The construction industry and small businesses were hit hardest by these high interest rates. As a result of the 1970s oil shocks, Americans learned that they could never maintain an economic policy of isolation. However, in Iran, a revolution occurred that ousted Shah Reza Pahlavi. The revolution heavily slowed Iran's oil production and sparked oil shortages. OPEC responded by increasing the petroleum prices. Carter retreated to Camp David to plan his next move, and when he returned, he delivered the Malaise speech. In the speech, Carter criticized Americans for being overly concerned with material goods and for taking part in a moral and spiritual crisis. Shortly after his speech, Carter fired 4 secretaries and reorganized his personal staff. Now, Frank, could you tell me more about the Iranian crisis?
Absolutely. Now, first let's talk about a little bit about the Cold War, if that's okay, Abe. The Cold War took a definite step towards thaw with the passage of SALT II by President Carter and Soviet leader Brezhnev. SALT, or the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, limited the amounts of nuclear weapons in each country's arsenals. Now I'll tell you about Iran. Only a few weeks after these talks, disaster struck as hundreds of angry Iranian revolutionaries stormed the American embassy in downtown Tehran, the capital of Iran. They took hostage over 100 American diplomats and demanded America extradite the Shah, their hated former leader, back to Iran. When America refused, negotiations broke down. The U.S.S.R. then invaded Afghanistan in an attempt to reach vital oil reserves in the Middle East. In response, Carter boycotted the Olympics, which were in Moscow at the time, and halted the flow of grain and machinery to the U.S.S.R. All the while, the Iranian hostage crisis was slowly bleeding Carter of domestic respect, and when a rescue mission turned sour and 8 men were killed, Carter's credibility died as well.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.
And comment down below if you have any questions. We'll catch you guys, as always, next time.